Hey all, Brian here. So I'm going to read chapter 16 of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, book 3 of the Morcyth Saga. Chapter 16. As the road continued northward, it stayed among the hills for several miles before easing back into the grasslands. From up ahead, a group of riders appeared, heading toward them. Miko began to turn off the road, but James stopped him. "They've already seen us," he said. "If we run, they'll chase us just to find out why." He then turned to Jerome. "If we ride like we belong, they may go right past." "Either way, they're going to be here very soon," Jerome replied. "Just continue on and stay calm," James said. Michael moved closer to James, with Jerome a few feet in front of them. As the riders neared, they could tell they were part of the Empire's cavalry. James watched them approach. His heart beat rapidly, and then they rode right on past. The riders gave them a once-over as they went by. Once the riders had disappeared to the south, they breathed a sigh of relief. "Why didn't they stop us?" Michael asked. When James turned to him, he continued, "We don't look like we belong." "Most people see what they think they are supposed to," he explained. "Since we were behaving normally and not acting odd, they assumed we belonged here." "When they get farther south and hear about us, they'll probably raise the alarm," said Jerome. "Maybe," he said. "Hopefully, by then, it won't make any difference." They continued heading north toward Madoc. Michael cast glances over his shoulder every once in a while as he searched for the return of the riders. A little past noon, they approached a town. It was a fair-sized town with a sizable defensive wall. Many people moved along its outer perimeter. Guards patrolled along the top. "We better steer clear of that," Jerome said, while they paused to consider their course of action. "But which way to go?" asked James. "To the right are hills, but from what Joby said, that may put us closer to the keep. To the left looks to be just plains with little chance to remain unnoticed." "Let's wait till dark," suggested Michael. "Then we could pass by and not be seen." Nodding, James said, "That would give the horses a chance to rest as well." Seeing how tired Michael was, he added, "We could use a break too." They turned around and headed back down the road several miles before turning off into the hills. When they had gone far enough that the road was no longer visible, they set up camp. After the horses were staked out and they had a bite to eat, Jerome climbed the hill overlooking the road in the distance. Lying down so as not to create a silhouette, he kept watch while the others tried to get some sleep. Able to get by with little sleep, he didn't bother waking them up for a turn at watch. From his vantage point, he could clearly see the road, and it remained devoid of traffic throughout the rest of the day. By nightfall, when he determined it had grown dark enough to conceal them, he returned and woke the others. They mounted and got back on the road, then headed off toward the town. Off in the distance, the town's lights became visible. Jerome led them to the west, maintaining a goodly distance between them as they circumnavigated the town. As they passed around the town, they crossed a road heading west. Traffic on the road was sparse. Several farms were scattered about the area, which caused them to take it slow, having to thread their way through them. A dog barked as they passed close to one farmhouse. The front door opened, and they saw the farmer outlined by the light coming from inside the house as he stood in the doorway. He yelled something at the dog and looked out into the night, but failed to see them in the dark. The dog continued to bark, and the man yelled at it once again. Giving a couple more barks, the dog finally became silent. The farmer stared out into the night for another minute before returning inside the house. Upon reaching the far side of town, they picked up the road again and continued following it north. With the town now behind them, they were able to once more make good speed. The three-quarter moon gave them plenty of light by which to see. As it slowly made its arc across the sky, they moved ever farther northward. As it reached its zenith, a band of riders could be heard fast approaching from the east. A shout came from them, and James looked and saw them in the moonlight. They were headed straight for them. A crossbow bolt flew past as one took a shot. "Ride!" James yelled as he kicked his horse into a gallop. The other two followed suit as they raced away from the approaching riders. Glancing back, he saw them turn to follow. He could make out at least 7 in the moonlight, though there very well could be more behind them in the darkness. "We're not going to be able to outrun them," announced Jerome. James glanced back and saw the riders were slowly continuing to gain. "You're right," he agreed. He brought his horse to a stop and turned to face them. Jerome and Miko did the same, just as a bola, a length of rope weighted at both ends, flew out of the dark and wrapped around him, pinning his arms to the side. Losing his balance, James tumbled backward off his horse and slammed into the ground. He snapped the bola in half with a thought, just as Jerome and Michael were hit, and they too fell from their horses. Frumph! The ground under the approaching riders exploded upward, throwing them in every direction. James drew his knife and soon had Jerome free as the remaining riders approached. Jumping to his feet, Jerome took the severed pieces of the bola which had bound him and hurled them at the approaching horsemen. One flew wide, but the other half connected with the lead horse, causing it to stumble and throw its rider. A stone shot across the battlefield, striking the remaining rider through the middle, knocking him off the horse. Jerome engaged the man who had just been thrown, his knives easily deflecting the rider's sword. From behind, he heard James yell, "Need him alive!" Concentrating now on the sword and less on attack, he bided his time. He saw the beginnings of the maneuver for which he waited. When the rider attacked with a thrust, he locked his knives together around the blade, and with a twist of his wrist, sent the sword flying. The rider tried to turn and flee, but Jerome tackled him and put a knife to his throat. James approached and asked the rider, "Who are you?" The rider just stared back defiantly. "You're not of the Empire," he said, holding the bola. "This, if nothing else, would indicate that. I've not seen anything like this in the Empire." Continuing with his defiant demeanor, the rider remained uncooperative. "Are you from the Kirkin Federation?" he asked. "That would be my guess. Perhaps a raiding party?" The man's eyes flinched just enough for James to know he'd hit the mark. "Let him go, Jerome." Not taking his knife away, he said, "But they tried to kill us." Looking at the man, James asked, "If we let you live, will you return home and leave us alone?" The man stared at James a moment, considering the veracity of his words. Then he nodded his head affirmatively. To Jerome, he said, "Let him go." Jerome slowly pulled the knife away from the man's throat. When no attack was forthcoming, he got slowly to his feet, never taking his eyes off the Kirkin soldier. As the man stood, James said, "We are not of the Empire. We are from the north and are currently at war with the Empire." "Madoc?" "He is," James said, indicating Jerome. Gesturing to Miko and himself, he said, "We're from Cardri." The Kirkin said, "We thought you to be the Empire's men." He looked around at his comrades lying dead around him before returning his attention to James. A costly mistake. "We would not want to count the Kirkins as enemies." The man nodded. "You are not, and I'm sorry we attacked you." He went over to a horse and grabbed the dangling reins. "I must return and tell what happened here. You are welcome to come with me." Shaking his head, James said, "No, we cannot afford the time." "As you wish," he said. He rounded up the other horses and placed the dead upon their backs, securing them into place. Then he tied the horses in line behind him before mounting. Then with a wave, he was off. They watched him as he disappeared into the night with the bodies of his dead comrades. "It's a shame they had to die," James said. "Fortunes of war, I'm afraid," Jerome added. "Why didn't we go with him?" Michael asked. "It seemed like a good idea." "We don't want to get caught up in someone else's war," he said. "We've got our own problems and duties." "What duties?" "Have you forgotten so soon?" he asked, pointing to Michael's pouch. "Oh, right," he said, then dropped to a whisper. "The fire." "Exactly," replied James. "We couldn't risk anyone getting their hands on it or even knowing about it." Getting back on their horses, they began moving once more northward. They traveled for several minutes before Jerome asked, "What do they hit us with?" "It's called a bola," he explained. "It's a length of rope with weights at both ends. They twirl it and then let it fly at their target. They do it right, then the target gets wrapped up and entangled. They were pretty effective." Nodding, James continued, "I've known them to be spiked and even had metal wires running the length of the rope to prevent it from being cut." "Nasty," he heard Michael say. "They can be," admitted James. They rode on in silence as they ate up the miles. In a short while, they came to where a new road formed going west, deeper into the heart of the Empire. Staying with the northerly route, they left it behind. After midnight, they stopped for a quick meal of cold rations, plus some from the Parvati's. "You know," James began, "this riding at night is a whole lot better than riding in the day." "Yeah," piped up Michael. "No one can see us." "Exactly," replied James. Maybe we should keep this up until we hang on. Maybe we should keep this up until we reach Madoc." This was a clunky sentence. All right. Maybe Jerome agreed, as long as we're able to find a place to hole up during the day. Not long after resuming their trek, lights from a town appeared up ahead. The town was smaller than the one they had skirted earlier. Jerome led them westward around it, making their way again through the farms and homes along the outskirts. Once they reached north of the town, Jerome found the north road and turned onto it. Beyond the town, the trees grew denser. After only a mile or so, the trees had grown so thick that their upper branches completely blocked the light from the moon. James had to cast his light spell so they could make their way, though just enough to be able to see the road. The night became stiller as they continued along the forest road. Off in the distance, they heard the sound of wolves and other nocturnal creatures. A shiver went up James's back as he remembered his first night in this world, where poor Seth had been torn to pieces. If I'd known then what I'd do now, he'd still be alive. So several hours later, they came to a bridge spanning a small river flowing to the south. The hollow sound of their horses' hooves walking across reminded James of Ichabod in Sleepy Hollow. He almost expected to hear the maniacal laughter of the headless horseman as he came charging out of the woods. They continued through the forest for several more hours before the sky began to lighten. James concealed his light spell, and the forest grew a little less foreboding with the morning light. "Should we find a spot to hold up for the day?" asked Miko. "No," replied James. "We'd lose too much time. Daylight's longer in the summer than the winter. Let's ride another hour or two before we stop." Obviously tired, and wanting nothing more than to get off his horse and sleep, Miko nodded. James looked over to his friend, understanding his need, but they had to make time while they could. He felt like they must be nearing the border between Madoc and the Empire. A couple more days or so and they should be there. That would be when the fun was really going to start as they tried to break through the lines. Hopefully, Madoc soldiers wouldn't mistake them for the Empire and attack. That has been James's biggest worry for the last day or so. Ever since the Kirkins mistook them for the Empire and attacked, he worried about other non-hostiles doing the same. From up ahead came the sound of approaching wagons. Jerome led them off into the woods to hide. A small caravan of 10 wagons and an accompaniment of 20 of the Empire's cavalry slowly made their way by. "Those wagons came from a mine," whispered Miko. "How could you tell?" Jerome asked. "I know. Trust me," he replied. "There must be a mining complex somewhere to the north." "I'm not destroying this one," James announced a little too loud. One of the cavalrymen turned to look in their direction as he paused a moment. Holding very still and quiet, they peered through the trees as he continued to search. Another of the cavalrymen came to him and they spoke in quiet tones. The other man looked in their direction as well, but after a couple more moments, he said something to the other and they both resumed their place along the wagons. Once the wagons had passed their hiding place and moved farther down the road, Jerome walked onto the road and looked south after the departing wagons. Once they were out of sight, he waved the others back onto the road. "Sorry," apologized James for his lapse in judgment when he'd spoken too loudly. "Don't worry about it. Nothing happened," assured Jerome. They turned and continued heading north. "Wonder what they were carrying that required an escort?" Michael asked. "Could be so the Kirkins wouldn't attack it." "That would make sense," agreed Jerome. "We'll need to keep on guard from here on out," said James. "If this is an ore shipment route, they'll have patrols or guards all along this stretch." Jerome glanced at him and nodded before turning back. They quickened their pace, anxious to get out of the confining forest. 2 hours later, fatigue had set in and the horses were starting to show signs of wear. They decided it was time to stop and move deeper into the forest, far enough from the road so anyone passing would be unable to see them. Tying the horses to neighboring trees, they took a moment to clear a camp before settling down. James took the first watch, with Jerome taking the last. Michael hated the middle. He never seemed to get adequate sleep when he did. During James's watch, the sound of fast-moving horses came from the north and disappeared to the south. He told Michael about the riders when he started his turn. Jerome woke everyone when the light began to fade. They had a quick meal of stale rations before mounting up and moving back to the road. After several miles, the trees grew sparser. Light from the moon was able to filter down through them more effectively. The road was barely discernible in the faint light, but enough could be seen so James didn't have to create his orb. They traveled down the road for several more hours before the trees thinned out even more. The ground began to rise and fall as they entered a series of rolling hills. If there are mountains ahead, That would explain where those wagons had come from, James said. We'll see, replied Jerome. Leading them on, he kept a brisk, distance-eating pace. The road wound through a series of increasingly steep hills, and after it went around a large one, the lights from a small village appeared in the distance. The road proceeded directly down the center of the village. There were not many buildings, reminding James of a ghost town he'd once visited. Do we go around? Michael asked. The hills are getting pretty steep, Jerome said. We may have no choice but to go through, James surmised. We can't afford to stumble around in rugged hills at night. There doesn't seem to be guards or soldiers, Jerome said. James gave the village a long look and nodded. I don't see any either. 1 second. He glanced from one building to another. Let's chance it. Riding quickly, but not so fast as to draw undue notice, they headed for the town. As soon as they passed the first building, an older man sitting on the steps called out a greeting. Unable to speak the language, Jerome just waved as he continued. As they passed by the one who had greeted them, the man called to them again, but they pointedly ignored him. Then from behind, they heard the man obviously swear at them. Michael turned around and saw him waving his fist. The man soon stopped, and to Michael's relief, settled back down on the steps. Others called greetings out as they passed through the town, and they heard curses follow them when they failed to respond. At the outskirts on the far side, they breathed a sigh of relief as they left behind the last building. They glanced back to the town and saw several people watching them, but made no move to follow. Guess we got off lucky, Jerome said. Looks that way. I'll be glad to be back where I can understand what someone's trying to tell me, Michael piped up. It's unnerving when you don't know what they're saying. I know what you mean, agreed James. The road continued to wind through steep hills with little in the way of hiding spots should the need arise. They continued along the road for several more hours, the hills around them steep and inaccessible. The lights from another town appeared from up ahead. This one was sizably larger than the one they had earlier passed through. There were many buildings, and when they paused a moment to survey the area, they saw guards on the streets. We could pass by over there, Jerome suggested, pointing to an area west of town. James looked to where he pointed and saw just a few buildings. The whole area was fairly dark, with but a small light escaping through several of the windows. Nodding, he said, "Looks to be our best bet. Let's go." With Jerome in the lead, they stayed as close to the side of the hill as they could. They were forced to pass close by one of the buildings, and as they moved past, the door suddenly opened and a man stepped out. The light from within the house illuminated them as they rode by on their horses through the man's backyard. They stared at each other a moment when suddenly the man called out and 2 dogs began barking. James saw 2 dogs run around the house and head straight for them as the man went back inside, shutting the door. He took a stone from his pocket and threw it at one of the dogs, taking it through the head. Jerome jumped down as his knives flashed in the moonlight. The dog jumped for him, and he twisted to the side as his knives struck the dog as it flew past. Blades cut deeply, and it hit the ground hard. The dog tried to get up, but was unable, and soon laid still as its life left it. From the other side of the house, they heard someone raising the alarm. "That tears it!" exclaimed Jerome as he got back on the horse. No longer worrying about being quiet, they raced toward the north side of town and the road. Lights sprang to life all over as people filled the street to see what was going on. From up ahead, a dozen soldiers moved to block their escape. Kicking their horses to greater speed, they raced to beat them to where the road headed back into the hills. "They're going to make it first," cried out Jerome. Crumph! The ground under the running soldiers erupted, tossing them every which way. The few that remained turned tail and fled. Suddenly, James felt a prickling sensation of someone doing magic. "They've got a mage!" A wall of flame sprang to life in front of them. The horses cried out and halted. James heard Michael yell. Turning to look, he saw Michael's panicked horse running directly toward town. Nothing Michael did seemed to be able to alter its course. "Michael!" he cried out as he turned to follow. The heat behind him increased, and he realized the wall of flame was quickly moving toward him. He concentrated on the fiery wall. He concentrated, and the wall. Hang on. He concentrated. Very well. He concentrated on the fiery wall, and it decreased inside as it slowed in its approach. Seeing James occupied with a wall of flame, Jerome said, "I'll get Miko." Without waiting to see if James had heard, he turned his horse and raced back toward town. James finally got the flaming wall to vanish. He looked about, trying to find the mage. He located the brown robe off to his right. Taking a stone from his pocket, he launched it at the mage and watched as the stone struck him dead center, blasting out the back. As the mage fell, James turned his horse toward town and hurried after Jerome. Upon reaching the edge of town, Jerome was thrown from his horse when a crossbow bolt struck it, knocking it out from under him. Jumping clear, he rolled and came to a crouched position as he surveyed the area. Another crossbow bolt struck the ground near his foot. He looked back along his trajectory and saw the crossbowman pull the crosswire back. Without hesitation, Jerome sprinted forward before the man could get it ready to fire. The crossbowman saw him approach and threw the crossbow at him as he drew his sword. He thrust at Jerome, who deflected the sword with one knife and then followed through with the other, sinking the blade 3 inches into the man's side. The man fell to the ground and began coughing up blood from where Jerome's knife had punctured his lungs. With him out of the way, Jerome looked around for Michael, but couldn't see him. The town was in total chaos. People scurried everywhere. "Miko!" he hollered, but no reply came. "Damn!" he cursed as he set off into town to locate him. James reached the outskirts just as the prickling sensation started again. Looking around, he saw another brown robe just as the air between them shimmered and a wave of force knocked him backward off his horse into the side of the building. Smashing into it with great force, James had the breath knocked out of him. As he tried to get his breath back, he took another stone out of his pouch and threw it at the brown robe. Again, the stone smashed through him and the mage fell to the ground. Looking for a third mage, he didn't see one. His horse had been spooked and was now running away out of town. Moving cautiously, he stayed against the building and moved farther into town. When he saw Jerome's horse dying in the middle of the street, he momentarily feared for his friend. But when there wasn't a body, figured he had already moved off to look for Miko. The streets were beginning to clear of pedestrians. James once more felt the prickling of magic being used. Just how many mages were in this stupid town? Subconsciously, he glanced back to where the last mage had fallen and stopped in shock. The mage's body was no longer there. He'd seen him fall after the stone had blasted a hole right through his chest. So where was it? Down the street in front of him, a brown robe stood as bolts of energy were fired toward him. He deflected them by creating a shield and threw one of his last stones toward the mage. The stones blasted through his chest and the mage fell to the ground. James moved toward the building and paused next to it as he kept an eye on the body of the fallen mage. After several moments, it shimmered and then disappeared. An illusion. He searched the area, trying to find where the mage actually was. From up the street, a brown robe began walking toward him. Without pausing, James launched a stone at the brown robe, and again the brown robe fell. James bent down and picked up a stick from the ground. He cast a seeking spell to find the source of the other mage's magic, and the stick pointed to the building across from him. Canceling the spell, he searched the windows before he caught sight of movement out of the corner of his eye. Looking all the way to the top, he saw a shadow upon the roof. Gotcha. He let the magic flow and directed it to the building beneath the mage. Cracking and snapping could be heard coming from within it as the support beams snapped in two. A section of the building collapsed, and then the whole thing caved in. A thick cloud of dust rose, and a second later, he saw the mage stumble from the rubble, coughing and holding a broken arm tightly to his chest. Letting the magic flow, James lashed out with an energy wave which struck with great force. The mage was thrown back into the wreckage, smashing through boards, and landed amidst the rubble. Moving toward the collapsed building, James hunted for the mage. A prickling sensation could be felt as the mage began a spell. James didn't wait for it to be completed. He lashed out with waves of force, pummeling the mage. The prickling wavered and then stopped. He created his oars and moved into the rubble. He found the mage, lying unconscious as blood oozed from her nose and mouth. A woman? Unable to outright kill her, he left her where she laid as he made his way out of the rubble and back onto the street. He canceled his orb so as not to be a beacon in the night for his enemies. Back on the street, which was now empty, he moved farther into town to find the others. Jerome, meanwhile, turned a corner and was knocked down by a running, terrified woman. The woman fell on top of him and began screaming. She clawed at him, leaving red lines along his left forearm before getting back to her feet and running away down the street. Jerome got up quickly and looked to where the woman had come from. He heard the clash of swords. "Miko!" he shouted as he raced toward the sound. As Jerome moved toward the sound of battle, a townsman rushed from a nearby doorway and hacked at him with his sword. Easily blocking the attack, Jerome kicked out with his foot and heard a snap as the man's knee shattered. The man fell to the ground, and Jerome moved away from him, leaving him there in his agony. James must be rubbing off on me, he thought, as he left the man alive. There needs to be a comma there. Suddenly, the light of fighting stopped, or the sound of fighting stopped, and from around the corner stepped Miko. Covered in blood and carrying a gore-covered sword, he walked towards Jerome. "Miko!" Jerome called out, but it didn't seem as if he heard him. Running forward, he stopped in front of Miko and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Miko, are you all right?" Hang on, "Miko, are you all right?" he asked as he shook him slightly, looking intently into his eyes. Miko suddenly started, as if seeing Jerome for the first time, and replied, "Yeah, I'm fine." "Thank the gods," Jerome said. "Let's find James and get out of here." Nodding, Michael looked at the sword in his hand, almost seemed surprised it was there. Tossing it away, he followed Jerome as they hunted for James. As they ran back down the street, they saw him coming toward them. "Are you two okay?" he asked as he came close and saw Michael covered in blood. "We're fine," replied Jerome. Michael nodded as well. "Then let's get out of here," he said. He surveyed the area and saw an inn. He led them around back to the stables. There they found a terrified stable boy who ran to his room and hid. While they were saddling 3 horses, they caught him peering out at them. Whenever he saw that they noticed, he would duck back inside the room. Once the horses were saddled, they mounted and rode out of the stables. No one was there to challenge them. As they raced out onto the street and made their way to the north side of town, people stared out of windows and from behind doorways, but none came forward to challenge them. If there were any guards or soldiers remaining, they had decided it more prudent to be absent than to stand in their way. They made it to the north road and quickly left the town behind. After they left, the townsfolk came out of their homes. They took stock of the damage wrought by the intruders. The most ghastly sight of all was the area where the boy had walked from, covered in blood and sword in hand. A dozen soldiers lay dead, as well as several of the townsfolk who had tried to help. Their bodies were literally hacked apart. Some wondered what had visited their town that night. Many prayed that it would never return. And that is chapter 16. So, what happened behind that building? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I had a good idea of where Miko's story arc was going at this point. I'm not sure at what point during the writing of this I came up with that, but I do know that going into this book, when I first started this book, what happened to Miko was not even a concept, was not even an idea. That just boom, it just happened. I think it might have just happened right in this moment. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it was a good arc though. It works very well later on, and so that is 16. I'll get to 17 as soon as I can. Thanks for hanging with me, and if you like these, make sure you subscribe to my channel. That really helps. Oh, also, you probably already know this, but I've started another playlist. It's called Tales of Fantasy. Basically what it is I am just telling stories, either about the Morcyth Saga, people in the Morcyth Saga. It has nothing to do with any storyline of my books. It may have people from my books in it, maybe locations from my books in it, and some stories won't have anything to do with it. Now, I did do one already. It's Scar and Potbelly and the Lunar Genie. That's right, the Lunar Genie, and I've already done that one. Yeah, it's a bit rough, I have to admit. I don't plan to redo it. But basically, the whole point of that is, I have ideas, and I like to get them down and out, but I don't really plan to ever do anything with them. And sometimes I just like telling a story. Some people say I've got a very active imagination, and I think really quickly on the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just telling a story, and it may be the point. And sometimes it may be where I sit down and I'm gonna say, okay, I've got like, well, I've been thinking about one, but another one to do later today. But like, okay, well, maybe a girl, she's in a riverfront town, and her boyfriend has stolen someone's sword, and we'll just go from there. And then I'll just tell the story from beginning, middle, end, and then that'll be it. I'm going to try to do at least 30 minutes, and maybe more, maybe less. But, yeah. And if you actually listen to those, let me know what you think, because I think I do fairly decent. No, it's not professional. No, I don't expect to ever make money from it. I'm doing it because it's fun. Also, I have 3 kids, and when I'm gone, they can go back to this and listen to me tell them stories. So, love it, hate it, I'm still going to do it. Y'all take care.